The desert air shimmered above the tarmac at Al Dafra Air Base, turning the horizon into liquid glass. Commander Jake Reeves stood with his arms crossed, watching a figure in grease-stained coveralls kneel beside the landing gear of an FA-18E Super Hornet. The mechanic worked with deliberate precision, fingers moving across hydraulic lines like a surgeon checking vital signs. Reeves had been briefed that his air support for the extraction mission would be delayed, that the regular pilot had been grounded with a respiratory infection, and that a replacement was being pulled from maintenance rotation. What he hadn't been told was that his air cover would be provided by someone who looked like they belonged under an aircraft rather than inside one. "You've got to be kidding me," Reeves muttered to his executive officer, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, who stood beside him with a tablet displaying mission parameters. "Sir, I'm just reading what Colonel Ashford sent over. Call St. Valkyrie, former aggressor squadron, 1400 flight hours, current assignment, aviation maintenance officer." Reeves watched the mechanic stand, wiping hands on a rag before turning toward them. Even from 50 yards away, he could see the tattoo sleeve extending from beneath the rolled coveralls, a detailed rendering of skeletal wings wrapped around a muscular forearm, and at the bicep, unmistakable even in the heat shimmer, the distinctive Hell's Angels Death's Head insignia. The figure pulled off a ball cap, releasing a cascade of dark auburn hair that had been tucked away, and began walking toward them with a gait that suggested someone comfortable in their own skin, unhurried by the judgment of others. "That's Lieutenant Commander Nix Keller," Webb said quietly, checking his tablet again. "Says here she flew combat missions over Syria and—" "I don't care if she flew over Mordor," Reeves interrupted. "I need someone in the air who's current, not someone who's been playing wrench monkey for the past 6 months. Keller stopped 3 feet away, her gray eyes meeting Reeves' stare without blinking. Up close, the tattoos told a more complex story. Between the traditional biker imagery were military insignias, coordinates, and dates. Her face bore the kind of weathering that came from squinting into sun-blasted canopies at 40,000 feet, and a thin scar traced from her left eyebrow into her hairline. "Commander Reeves," she said, her voice carrying a subtle rasp, "I understand you have concerns about your air support package." The way she said it, not defensive, not apologetic, just stating a fact, made something in Reeves' chest tighten. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation. The mission brief had seemed straightforward when Reeves first reviewed it in the TOC 3 hours earlier. His SEAL team would insert via CH-47 Chinook into a valley 12 kilometers south of the Syrian border, extract a high-value informant who'd been feeding intelligence on ISIS weapon caches, and exfiltrate before dawn. The window was tight, wheels up at 2200 hours, boots on ground at 2315, back in the air by 0130. Air support would maintain a combat air patrol overhead, ready to provide close air support if the team encountered resistance. Simple, clean, routine. Except now his air support looked like she just walked off the set of a motorcycle documentary, and he was supposed to trust her with the lives of his men. "Let's talk in the ready room," Reeves said, gesturing toward the operations building. "I want to go over engagement protocols." Keller nodded once and fell into step beside him, her boots leaving precise prints in the dust. Webb trailed behind, still scrolling through her service record on his tablet, his eyebrows rising incrementally with each page. The ready room was mercifully air-conditioned, the temperature dropping 30 degrees as they stepped inside. Reeves moved to the large monitor displaying satellite imagery of the target area, a valley system flanked by rocky ridgelines that rose 3,000 feet on either side. Natural choke points, perfect ambush terrain. "Here's what I need," Reeves began, using a laser pointer to trace their ingress route. "You maintain station here at 15,000 feet in a racetrack pattern. If we call for fire support, response time needs to be under 90 seconds. Rules of engagement are..." Weapons tight unless you call Sparkle or have PID on direct threat to friendly forces, Keller interrupted, her eyes tracking across the map with an intensity that suggested she was already flying the mission in her mind. Minimum safe distance for gun runs is 200 meters, bombs are 400. You'll be on ground frequency push 4. I'll be monitoring on tactical common. If you need immediate suppression, call danger close and I'll come in hot with 30 Mike. Reeves paused, the laser pointer hovering over the extraction point. The casual confidence in her voice when discussing the GAU-22A's 25mm cannon surprised him. Keller moved closer to the screen, her finger tracing the ridgelines. These elevations concern me more than enemy contact. Terrain masking will limit my sensor picture until I'm practically on top of you. If you take fire from these positions, she tapped 2 peaks flanking the valley. I'll need to come in from the northwest to avoid flying down the throat of whatever's shooting. You've flown in terrain like this before. Something flickered across Keller's face, gone before Reeves could interpret it. Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, take your pick, Commander. Mountains all look the same when someone's shooting at you from them. Webb cleared his throat from his position near the door. Sir, her jacket shows she flew with VFC-13 Saints as an adversary pilot before her transition to maintenance. She's also got a Navy Cross citation from. Webb, Reeves said sharply, cutting him off. He didn't need his XO reading him bedtime stories about medals. He needed to know if this woman could actually fly when his men's lives were on the line. Give us the room. After Webb left, Reeves turned to face Keller directly. Let me be straight with you, Lieutenant Commander. I don't care about your decorations or your hours logged. I care about whether you're sharp enough to keep my team alive tonight. 6 months pushing paperwork and fixing hydraulics doesn't exactly scream combat ready. Keller's expression didn't change, but her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, weight settling more firmly into her stance, shoulders squaring. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that came from somewhere deeper than pride. March 17, 2022. Eastern Syria. My wingman took a MANPADS hit during a close air support mission covering a Ranger element pinned down by Syrian Army regulars. He punched out, landed 3 clicks behind enemy lines. I stayed overhead for 4 hours, past bingo fuel, past every safety margin in the book, flying gun runs with whatever I had left while combat search and rescue got their act together. Burned so much fuel I had to tank 3 times, and the last one happened while taking sporadic ground fire. She moved to the monitor, pulling up a new image overlay, not part of the mission brief, but something from her personal files. The photo showed a Super Hornet with its tail section peppered with small caliber holes, the vertical stabilizer looking like Swiss cheese. I brought my bird home on fumes and prayers, and I brought my wingman home alive. The Navy Cross citation is collecting dust in a drawer somewhere, Commander. What matters is that Captain Jason Thorne walks his daughter to school every morning because I didn't leave station when I was supposed to. She paused, and when she continued, her voice had dropped to something quieter, harder. You want to know if I'm sharp? I maintain these aircraft because I respect what they can do, and I respect the people who fly them. Every bolt I tighten, every system I check, that's another pilot who comes home. So yes, I'm sharp. Question is whether you trust me to prove it. The silence that followed pressed against Reeves' eardrums like a pressure change. Through the ready room window, he could see Webb packing outside, checking his watch. 2000 hours. 2 hours until wheels up. The mission window was closing while he stood here having a pissing contest with a maintenance officer who apparently had more combat experience than half his team combined. He thought about his men, 8 SEALs who trained together for months, who trusted him to make the right calls. He thought about the informant waiting in that valley, whose intelligence had already prevented 2 suicide bombings in Baghdad. He thought about his own daughter, 5,000 miles away in Virginia Beach, and how Jason Thorne's daughter got to keep her father because someone made the hard choice to stay when they could have left. "All right," Reeves said finally. "You're cleared for the mission, but I want a comm check every 15 minutes, and if I sense even a hint that you're not on your game, you'll have Lieutenant Colonel Ashford pull me faster than I can say fuel state," Keller finished. "Understood, Commander." She extended her hand. Reeves looked at it, scarred knuckles, engine grease still embedded under the nails despite obvious scrubbing, that death's head grinning from her forearm, and shook it. Her grip was exactly what he expected, firm without being performative, the hand of someone who knew their own strength and didn't need to prove it. As Keller left to begin her pre-flight, Webb slipped back inside. "Think she's legit, sir?" Reeves watched through the window as Keller walked toward the flight line, her stride purposeful, a helmet bag slung over one shoulder. The setting sun caught the skeletal wings on her arm, making them seem to shimmer with their own light. "I think we're about to find out." The pre-flight brief happened at 2100 hours in the operations center. 15 personnel crowded around the same satellite imagery Reeves had studied earlier. His 8 SEALs sat in the front row, faces painted, kit already staged on the Chinook. Behind them, the air crew, 2 pilots, 2 crew chiefs, a combat controller. And off to one side, slightly separate from the group, Keller sat with her flight suit unzipped to the waist, the sleeves of her thermal undergarment pushed up to reveal those tattoos again. Several of the SEALs had noticed, exchanging glances that ranged from curious to skeptical. The squadron commander, Colonel Richard Ashford, ran through the mission timeline with military precision. Intelligence updates, weather forecast, enemy situation report, contingency plans Alpha through Delta. It was all information Reeves had absorbed and processed, but he found himself watching Keller's reactions to each briefing point. She didn't take notes, didn't ask questions. Just watched the screens with that same intense focus he'd seen earlier, as if she were flying the mission in real time inside her head. When Ashford reached the air support portion of the brief, he gestured to Keller. "Lieutenant Commander Keller will be flying single-ship CAP in tail number 417. Valkyrie, you want to brief your station and weapons load." Keller stood, moving to the front of the room with an economy of motion that suggested someone comfortable with briefings but not particularly fond of them. "I'll be carrying 2 GBU-12s, 2 AIM-9X, 2 AIM-120, and 570 rounds of 25 mic. Station time on target is 4 hours with available tanker support. Primary frequency will be Purple 26. Backup is covered on your card. If you need me, use callsign Valkyrie 1. If everything goes according to plan, you won't hear from me except for scheduled comms checks. If things go sideways, I'm 30 seconds out from wherever you are." One of the younger SEALs, a petty officer first class named Rodriguez, raised his hand. "Ma'am, no offense, but how long since you've flown combat?" The room went quiet. It was the question everyone was thinking, but nobody else had the balls or the youth to actually ask. Keller didn't flinch. 6 months since my last flight, 2 years since my last combat sortie. Before that, I flew 97 combat missions across 3 theaters. I know you're wondering if I'm rusty. Fair question. Here's my answer. I flew this morning. Not the mission bird. A training sortie, 2 hours, ran through every engagement scenario you might need tonight. My gun accuracy is still within 3% of my career average. My bombing circular error probable is still under 10 meters. And my decision-making under stress is exactly what it was when I was pulling Thorne's ass out of Syria. Calculated, calm, and focused on bringing everyone home. She let that sit for a moment before adding, "But you don't know me and you don't have to trust me. What you need to trust is this. I will be where I say I'll be when I say I'll be there. And if you need me, I'm coming. Period." Rodriguez nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression from skepticism to consideration. Around the room, Reeves saw similar adjustments in posture, in the set of jaws, in the way his men looked at this tattooed maintenance officer who apparently could still fly like she'd never stopped. The brief concluded at 21:45, 15 minutes until wheels up. The SEALs filtered out toward the flight line, checking weapons and comms gear with practiced efficiency. Reeves lingered, watching Keller as she zipped her flight suit and pulled on her survival vest, each motion automatic muscle memory from thousands of repetitions. "That speech about bringing everyone home," Reeves said quietly, approaching her. "You really believe that, or was it just for their benefit?" Keller finished securing her vest straps before looking at him. In the harsh fluorescent light of the operations center, the scar on her forehead stood out more prominently, and Reeves found himself wondering what had put it there. "My father was a Navy pilot," she said, her voice taking on a different quality, softer but no less intense. F-14 Tomcat driver, shot down over Iraq in 1991 during Desert Storm. I was 3 years old. My mother got the folded flag, the condolence letter from his co, and a lifetime of explaining to people why Daddy wasn't coming home. I joined the Navy because of him, and I fly because of him. But I also made myself a promise the day I got my wings. I would never be the reason someone else's kid had to ask where their parent went." She picked up her helmet, a sleek HGU-68P with custom artwork on the side, a stylized Valkyrie riding a missile through storm clouds, and tucked it under her arm. "So yes, Commander, I really believe it. Every single time I strap into that cockpit, I'm carrying my father's memory and every pilot who didn't make it home. That's not rhetoric. That's why I'm still here." 2200 hours arrived with the low thunder of turbine engines spooling up. The Chinook sat on the tarmac with its rotors already turning, the downwash kicking up dust devils that danced across the flight line. Reeves and his team moved in a tactical column toward the bird, each man checking the man in front of him, ensuring nothing was loose, nothing was forgotten. This was the moment when training became reality, when all the planning crystallized into action. 50 yards away, Keller walked toward her Super Hornet with her crew chief, a grizzled master chief named Cordero who'd been turning wrenches since before she was born. They conducted the walk-around together, Cordero pointing out his pre-flight checks while Keller verified each one with her own eyes and hands. From a distance, it looked almost like a ritual, two people who understood that the aircraft was not just a machine, but a partner in whatever was about to happen. Reeves climbed into the Chinook's cargo bay, settling into his seat between Rodriguez and his team medic, Chief Petty Officer Mike Torrens. Through the open ramp, he watched Keller climb the ladder into her cockpit, watched Cordero help her strap in, watched the crew chief give one final thumbs up before pulling the ladder away and backing clear of the aircraft. The Super Hornet's engines came alive with a rising whine that cut through even the Chinook's rotor wash. Navigation lights flickered on, red on the left wing, green on the right, white on the tail. In the cockpit, Keller's helmet was silhouetted against the glow of her instruments, and even from this distance, Reeves could see her hands moving across controls with fluid precision, bringing systems online in a sequence that was both technical dance and combat preparation. "Valkyrie 1 Tower, you're cleared for taxi runway 27. Keller's voice came through on the command frequency, calm and professional. "Tower, Valkyrie 1, taxi 27, copy." The Super Hornet began rolling forward, its nose gear strut compressing and extending with each seam in the concrete. Reeves felt the Chinook shudder as its pilots increased power, and then they were lifting, the ground falling away in that distinctive helicopter ascent that always felt more like being pulled upward by invisible wires than actual flight. The two aircraft moved toward the runway in sequence, Keller in her sleek fighter, Reeves and his team in their lumbering transport. Two different machines, two different missions. But for the next 4 hours, their fates would be linked by radio frequencies and the understanding that in combat, trust wasn't optional. The Chinook's pilot, a warrant officer named Patterson with over 2,000 flight hours, came over the internal comm. 10 seconds to wheels up, folks. Next stop, scenic Syria. Through the porthole window, Reeves saw the Super Hornet reach the runway threshold, pause for a moment as Keller ran up her engines one final time, and then accelerate down the center line. The afterburners lit, twin cones of blue-white flame that turned night into day, and the aircraft rotated, nose lifting, main gear leaving the earth, climbing fast and steep into the darkness above the Persian Gulf. She was airborne, they were committed, the mission was live. Romeo 2-1, this is Valkyrie 1, I'm airborne and climbing to station. How copy? Reeves keyed his radio, watching the Super Hornet's navigation lights become indistinguishable from stars as it climbed higher. Valkyrie 1, Romeo 2-1, good copy. See you on the other side. Roger that, Commander, I've got you. Something in the way she said those last three words, I've got you, settled something in Reeves' chest that he hadn't realized was tight. Maybe it was the confidence without bravado. Maybe it was the recognition that she understood what those words meant, the promise embedded in them. Or maybe it was simpler. She'd flown this mission in her mind 100 times already, and in that mental rehearsal, everyone had come home. The Chinook banked northwest, following its planned route into Syrian airspace. Below, the lights of Al Dhafra faded into darkness, replaced by the vast emptiness of desert. Reeves checked his watch. 22:45, 30 minutes to the target. He looked at his men, professionals everyone, faces painted, weapons ready, each locked into their pre-combat mental state. They trusted him. Now he had to trust that the tattooed pilot somewhere above them was everything she claimed to be. At 15,000 feet, Keller leveled her Super Hornet and established her combat air patrol pattern. The night was clear, visibility unlimited, stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Her heads-up display painted green symbology across her canopy, airspeed, altitude, heading, weapons status, everything nominal, everything ready. She could see the Chinook on her radar, a slow-moving contact 30 miles southeast, following the terrain as it penetrated Syrian airspace. The infrared pod under her fuselage gave her a god's-eye view of the landscape, heat signatures from scattered buildings, the cooler traces of wadis and valleys, and that one distinctive IR signature of turbine engines that marked Romeo 2-1 carrying its cargo of warriors into danger. Valkyrie 1, status check. Reeves' voice came through, professional but with an edge that suggested he was now fully mission-focused. Romeo 2-1, Valkyrie 1, station established. All systems green, 4 hours of playtime available. Visual contact with your element. Copy Valkyrie, going silent until feet dry. Will call if needed. I'll be here. Keller adjusted her oxygen mask, a habitual motion that she'd performed thousands of times, and settled into the rhythm of combat flying. There was a meditation to it, the constant scan of instruments, the periodic check of systems, the awareness of fuel state and weapons readiness and navigation accuracy. Some pilots found it stressful. She found it centering. Up here, 15,000 feet above the problems of the Earth, there was only the mission, the machine, and the promise she'd made to herself years ago. The tattoos on her arms were hidden beneath her flight suit now, but she could feel them against her skin, each one a marker of memory, of loss, of survival. The Hell's Angel's death's head had been a gift from her father's squadron mates, inked on her 18th birthday by a retired Marine who'd flown with the old man and wanted her to carry something of that brotherhood. The coordinates traced across her left forearm marked the location where Jason Thorne had ejected, where she'd made the choice to stay when she should have left. And there were others, dates, initials, symbols that only she understood, a personal history written in permanent ink on temporary flesh. She banked left, continuing her racetrack pattern, and checked her fuel state, 92%. The tanker was orbiting 100 miles north, ready when she needed it. For now, she had time. Time to watch. Time to wait. Time to be ready for whatever was about to happen in that valley below, where 8 men were about to step off the helicopter into uncertainty, trusting that she would be there if they needed her. The Valkyrie tattoo on her helmet bag hadn't been her choice of call sign. It had been given to her by her first squadron commander after a training mission where she'd flown so aggressively, so perfectly, that he'd said she flew like the Norse goddesses of death, choosing who would live and who would fall. She'd accepted it because it meant something to him, but over time she'd made it her own. A Valkyrie didn't just choose the slain. A Valkyrie protected warriors. And tonight she would prove that in the only way that mattered, by bringing them all home. The desert below was dark and silent, but Keller knew that silence was temporary. Combat always started quiet. It never stayed that way. The Chinook descended through 3,000 feet, its pilots using terrain-following radar to thread the needle between ridgelines that rose like the walls of a canyon. Reeves felt the familiar flutter in his stomach as they dropped, the sensation of falling that never quite went away no matter how many insertions he'd done. Beside him, his men were locked in, weapons across their laps, night vision goggles pulled down over their eyes, each breathing in the slow, controlled rhythm of warriors preparing for violence. The crew chief's voice crackled over the internal comm. 2 minutes. Rodriguez shifted his grip on his M4, checking the magazine seating for the third time in as many minutes. Torrens, the medic, patted the trauma kit strapped to his vest, ensuring it was secure. These were the small rituals that preceded combat, the physical manifestations of mental preparation. Reeves had his own. He touched the compass on his chest rig, a gift from his father who'd carried it through Vietnam. 3 generations of warriors, all trusting the same small rituals to bring them through the darkness. The Chinook flared hard, its nose rising as the pilots dumped airspeed. Through the open ramp, Reeves saw the ground rushing up, not the flat desert they'd crossed but a narrow valley floor studded with rocks and scrub vegetation. The wheels touched down with a solid thump, and even before they'd fully settled, his team was moving. Go, go, go. 8 men flowed out the back ramp in a practice stream, each peeling off to establish security in a different direction. Reeves hit the ground running, his boots finding purchase on loose gravel as he moved 20 meters from the landing zone and dropped to a knee, his rifle scanning the ridgeline above. The Chinook's engines never spooled down. It stayed on the ground for exactly 8 seconds before the pilots pulled pitch and lifted back into the darkness, leaving the SEALs alone in the valley. The silence that followed was profound. The Chinook's rotor wash faded, replaced by the small sounds of the desert night, wind in the rocks, the distant cry of some nocturnal bird, the soft clinks of metal on metal as his team shifted into their patrol formation. Romeo 2-1, all elements set. His 2IC whispered over the radio, Chief Warrant Officer Dave Martinez, a veteran of more operations than Reeves could count. Roger, moving to objective rally point, standard spread, noise discipline. They moved like ghosts through the darkness, night vision turning the world into shades of green and gray. The objective rally point was a cluster of rocks 2 kilometers from their landing zone, halfway to the village where their informant was supposed to be waiting. Intelligence said the village was occupied by a handful of families, mostly goat herders, with no significant enemy presence. But intelligence had been wrong before, and the weight of history made Reeves check his corners more carefully, scan his sectors more thoroughly. Above them, unseen but present, Keller continued her patrol. Every 15 minutes her voice came through on the command frequency, calm and steady. Romeo 2-1, Valkyrie 1, status check. Valkyrie 1, Romeo, all quiet, proceeding to phase line Alpha. Copy Romeo, I have your position marked. No thermal signatures in your immediate area. That was useful information, confirmation that nothing was moving near them, that the valley was as empty as it appeared. Reeves keyed his radio twice in acknowledgement, maintaining radio silence, and continued the patrol. They reached the objective rally point at 23:45, 30 minutes ahead of schedule. The rocks provided good cover and concealment, with clear sightlines back down the valley and forward toward the village. Reeves positioned his team in a security perimeter and used his binoculars to study the objective. A dozen mud brick buildings clustered around a central courtyard. No lights, no movement, everything exactly as briefed. Valkyrie 1, Romeo 2-1 were at the rally point, moving to objective in 5 mics. Roger Romeo, thermal shows the village is cold, no heat signatures except ambient cooling from daytime sun. Whatever's there, it's not moving. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made something in Reeves' gut tighten. An occupied village, even in the middle of the night, should show some signs of life. Cooking fires, body heat, something. The complete absence of thermal signature suggested either the village was abandoned or everyone was very deliberately hiding their presence. Martinez, Reeves whispered to his 2IC, "What do you think?" The older operator lowered his night vision and stared toward the village with naked eyes for a long moment. "I think it's too quiet, boss. Even if everyone's asleep, we should see something. Dogs, livestock. This feels wrong." Reeves keyed his radio. "Valkyrie 1, can you push your sensors? Get me a detailed sweep of that village and the surrounding terrain. Something's off." "Romeo Valkyrie, give me 30 seconds." Above them, Keller adjusted her flight path, bringing the Super Hornet around in a wide arc that would give her targeting pod the best angle on the village. She zoomed in, cycling through infrared, optical, and synthetic aperture radar modes, building a composite picture of the objective. The pod was sensitive enough to detect human body heat through most building materials, accurate enough to distinguish between an adult and a child based on thermal mass. What she saw made her jaw tight beneath her oxygen mask. "Romeo Valkyrie, I'm seeing something you need to know about. The village itself is clear, no personnel, no thermal signatures. But on the ridgeline northeast of your position, approximately 700 meters, I've got multiple thermal returns. Count 5. Correction, 7 heat signatures spaced evenly, all stationary. They're in good fighting positions and they've been there long enough that the ground around them shows cold spots where they've been lying." Reeves felt the cold clarity of adrenaline flood his system. An ambush. The village was bait, and they'd nearly walked right into it. "Valkyrie, can you identify weapons?" "Negative visual ID, but spacing and positioning are consistent with crew-served weapons, PKMs or better. They've got overlapping fields of fire covering the entire village approach. If you'd gone in without checking, you'd have walked into a buzzsaw." Reeves looked at Martinez, saw his own recognition reflected in the other man's eyes. Someone had compromised the operation. Someone had told the enemy they were coming. The informant they were supposed to extract was either dead, captured, or had sold them out. "All Romeo elements, this is 2-1. We've got hostiles on the northeast ridge. Stand by for new taskings." Reeves pulled out his map, using a red lens flashlight to study the terrain. The ambush position was well chosen. High ground, good fields of fire, a clear withdrawal route deeper into the mountains. Taking it on would be costly, maybe impossible without close air support. But walking away meant abandoning the mission, and more importantly, abandoning the informant if there was any chance he was still alive and salvageable. The tactical problem crystallized in Reeves' mind with perfect clarity. The enemy was watching the village, waiting for his team to enter the kill zone. They didn't know the SEALs had stopped at the rally point. They didn't know they'd been spotted. That gave Reeves one advantage: surprise. The question was how to use it. "Valkyrie 1, Romeo 2-1, I need options." There was a pause, and Reeves could imagine Keller running calculations in her head. Weapons parameters, approach vectors, collateral damage considerations, friendly positions. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into something harder, more focused, the tone of someone who'd made these decisions before and understood their weight. "Romeo, I can suppress that position with guns or bombs, but you need to tell me what you want the outcome to be. If you want them dead, I can drop coordinates into the hillside and nothing survives. If you want them suppressed so you can maneuver, I can work them over with the gun and keep their heads down for 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. If you want time to withdraw, I can make their ridge uninhabitable for the next hour. Your call, Commander." Reeves closed his eyes, running through the scenarios. If they withdrew, the mission was blown and the informant was lost. If they attacked, casualties were likely. If they tried to maneuver around the ambush, they risked running into additional enemy positions they hadn't spotted yet. Every option had costs. "Stand by, Valkyrie." He switched to the team frequency. "Martinez, Rodriguez, Torrens on me. Security element maintains perimeter." The three operators moved to his position with practiced silence. In the green glow of their night vision, they looked like creatures from another world, faceless, inhuman, purely tactical. Reeves spread his map and pointed to the enemy position. 7 hostiles, crew-served weapons, northeast ridge. They're waiting for us to walk into the village. We've got 3 plays. 1. We call in Valkyrie, turn that ridge into a crater and search the village while they're still figuring out what happened. 2. We abort, call for extraction right off the mission. 3. We split the team, send a flanking element up the southern approach while Valkyrie keeps them focused on the village, hit them from an unexpected angle. Martinez studied the map, his finger tracing elevation lines. Option 3 gives us the best chance of taking prisoners, finding out what happened to our informant, but it's also the highest risk. That southern approach is steep, 30, maybe 40-degree slope in places, technical climbing with full kit. "I can do it," Rodriguez said quietly. "Grew up in Colorado, I've climbed worse." Torrens looked at Reeves. "Boss, if we're splitting the team, you need to consider that if things go south, we're dividing our combat power. If both elements get hit simultaneously, we're screwed." It was the kind of honest assessment that made Torrens valuable. He wasn't arguing against the plan, just making sure everyone understood the stakes. Reeves appreciated that kind of clear thinking. "Here's how we'll play it," Reeves decided. "Martinez, take Rodriguez, Torrens, and Kowalski. You're the flanking element. Move up that southern approach, get above them if you can. I'll take the rest of the team and move toward the village, not into it but close enough that we look like we're setting up for entry. That should hold their attention. Once you're in position, I'll have Valkyrie put 1 bomb 500 meters north of their position. Danger close to them, safe for us. In the confusion, you hit them from the flank. We collapse on them from below. Valkyrie provides overwatch and immediate CAS if we need it." "Time heck." Reeves checked his watch. "It's 23:55 now. You've got 45 minutes to get into position. We execute at 0040. That gives us 50 minutes to complete the assault, search the village, and reach the extraction point before our ride shows up." The 4 operators moved out within 2 minutes, becoming invisible as they slipped into the darkness and began their climb. Reeves watched them go, then keyed his radio. "Valkyrie 1, Romeo 2-1, we're splitting the team. I'm sending a flanking element up the southern ridge. Once they're in position, I need you to drop 1 GBU-12 on these coordinates." He read off the grid. "That's 500 meters north of the enemy position. The blast should rattle them, make them think we're hitting from the north. While they're reacting, my flanking element hits from the south, and I move up from the valley floor. Can you make that shot?" "Romeo, Valkyrie. Coordinates copied. Be advised, 500 meters is close. You'll feel the overpressure even from the valley floor. Make sure your people have their mouths open to equalize or they'll blow their eardrums." "Understood. Stand by for execute command. You'll have 15-minute warning before we're ready." "Roger, Romeo. One more thing. After I drop that bomb, my station time drops to 90 minutes before I need to tank. That's enough for the assault and your exfil, but if things drag out, I'll have to break station. There's a backup bird launching from Al Dafra in 30 minutes, but you'll have a 10-minute gap in air cover during the transition." Reeves absorbed that information, adding it to his mental calculus. 10 minutes of vulnerability. In combat terms, that was an eternity. "Copy, Valkyrie. We'll make it work." "I know you will." Valkyrie one standing by. The next 40 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Reeves positioned his remaining 4 operators in a loose line facing the village, close enough to be spotted if the enemy was using night vision, far enough back to have time to react if things went wrong. They waited in silence, watching the ridgeline where 7 hostile forces lay in ambush, unaware that they'd been compromised, unaware that death was circling 15,000 feet above them in the form of a tattooed pilot who'd promised to bring everyone home. At 15,000 feet, Keller had already programmed the coordinates into her weapon's computer, already calculated the attack run geometry, already visualized the entire sequence. She would roll in from the northwest, diving at 30 degrees, release the GBU-12 at 12,000 feet and pull off to the south. Time of fall, 18 seconds. Circular error probable with the precision guidance kit, less than 3 meters. The bomb would land exactly where Reeves wanted it, plus or minus the width of a pickup truck. She dropped hundreds of bombs in training, dozens in combat. Each one was different target, different stakes, different lives hanging in the balance. But they were also all the same in the ways that mattered. The same physics, the same procedures, the same moment of commitment when she pressed the pickle button and sent explosive force toward the earth. Romeo 2-1, Flanker 1. Martinez's voice came through on the radio, slightly breathless from the climb. We're in position. Good line of sight on the enemy position. Count confirmed at 7 hostiles, at least 2 PKMs visible, possible RPGs. They're still locked on the village. No indication they know we're here. Copy Flanker, stand by for fireworks. Reeves took a deep breath, forcing his heart rate to slow, his mind to clear. This was the moment when planning became execution, when all the briefings and rehearsals collided with reality. His men were in position. Keller was ready overhead. The enemy was exactly where intel had placed them, which was both reassuring and suspicious. Rarely did everything go exactly according to plan. All Romeo elements, Romeo 2-1. Execute, execute, execute. Valkyrie, you're cleared hot. Romeo Valkyrie 1, Roger, cleared hot. Rolling in now, 30 seconds. Above the valley, Keller pushed her stick forward and rolled inverted, pulling the Super Hornet into a 45-degree dive that would put her on the attack vector. The G-forces pressed her into her seat as she pulled through, the aircraft transitioning from level flight to attack run in a maneuver that she'd practiced so many times it was instinctive. Her HUD showed the attack cone narrowing, the release point approaching. 12,000 feet, 10,000. She could see the ridgeline now with her naked eyes, a darker shadow against the dark terrain. Rifle, she called, pressing the release button. The GBU-12 detached from its pylon with a solid clunk that she felt through the airframe. Bomb away, 10 seconds. She pulled hard on the stick, braking left and climbing, getting clear of the blast zone. Below her, the bomb fell in silence, its precision guidance fins making minute corrections based on GPS coordinates, steering toward the programmed impact point with single-minded determination. In the valley, Reeves and his men opened their mouths and pressed their hands against their ears. The silence seemed to stretch, and for one terrible moment, Reeves wondered if the bomb had malfunctioned, if. The explosion lit up the night like a second sun. A massive fireball rose from the ridgeline, followed by a pressure wave that slammed across the valley like a physical thing. Even from 600 meters away, the overpressure was stunning. Reeves felt it compress his chest, felt the air driven from his lungs, felt the earth shake beneath him. Rocks and debris fountained into the air, tumbling back to earth in a lethal rain. Flanker 1, move now. Reeves shouted into his radio, and then he was up and running toward the village, his team flowing around him, using the chaos of the explosion as cover. On the ridgeline, the enemy position had dissolved into confusion. The 7 fighters had thrown themselves flat at the blast, their night vision ruined by the flash, their ears ringing from the concussion. 2 of them were screaming, hit by flying rock fragments. The others were trying to bring their weapons to bear, but they were disoriented, unable to process what had just happened. Martinez and his flanking element hit them like a hammer. 4 SEALs appearing from the darkness above, their suppressed weapons making soft puffing sounds as they engaged. 2 enemies went down in the first 3 seconds. A third turned and brought his AK-47 up, but Rodriguez put 2 rounds through his center mass before he could fire. The remaining 4 tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. Reeves and his element were coming up from the valley floor, blocking their withdrawal route south. "Cease fire," Martinez's voice cut through the chaos. "Cease fire, I've got 2 down, willing to surrender." Reeves reached the ridgeline 30 seconds later, his lungs burning from the sprint uphill in full kit. 2 enemy fighters lay on their stomachs with their hands behind their heads, zip cuffs already securing their wrists. 5 others were dead or dying, the efficiency of SEAL training evident in the precision of the kill shots. Martinez stood over the prisoners, his rifle trained on them with steady hands. "Boss, we've got a problem," Torrens called from 20 meters away. He was kneeling next to something, someone. Reeves moved closer and felt his stomach drop. The informant lay in the dirt, a single bullet hole in the back of his head. Execution style. He'd been dead for hours, his body already cooling. They'd been set up from the start. Someone had compromised the mission, killed their source, and positioned the ambush to wipe out the rescue team. Valkyrie 1, Romeo 2-1, objective secure. 7 enemy KIA, 2 prisoners. Informant is KIA. The mission is compromised. Keller's voice came back immediately. "Romeo, Valkyrie, copy all. Be advised, I'm picking up movement 3 kilometers east of your position. Multiple vehicles, looks like a QRF responding to the explosion. Count 4. Correction, 5 vehicles, probably 20+ personnel. They're moving fast toward your location." Of course, there was a quick reaction force. The ambush had been too professional, too well coordinated to be a random encounter. This was a planned operation, and the enemy had resources in depth. Reeves ran the math in his head. They were 45 minutes from the extraction point, and they had enemy forces converging on their position. The mission had just transformed from an extraction to a running gunfight. "All Romeo elements, this is 2-1. We're moving to extraction point Bravo now. Combat load, leave nothing behind. Rodriguez, police up any intelligence from these bodies, phones, maps, anything useful. You've got 90 seconds. Valkyrie 1, I need you to slow down those vehicles. Can you interdict without creating a tick? Romeo, I can hit their lead vehicle, block the road, force them to dismount and move on foot. That'll buy you maybe 20 minutes, but I'm at bingo fuel -10. I've got 1 more attack run before I have to head for the tanker." Reeves looked at Martinez, saw the same calculation happening in the other man's eyes. 1 attack run, 20 minutes of breathing room, 45 minutes to the extraction point. The math didn't work unless they moved faster than humanly possible. "Do it, Valkyrie. Hit their lead vehicle. After that, head for the tanker. We'll make it to the extraction point on our own." "Negative, Romeo." Keller's voice had taken on an edge that Reeves hadn't heard before, something hard and immovable. "I don't leave station until your wheel's up. I'll make my fuel work. You just move." There was no point arguing. The tone in her voice made it clear the decision wasn't up for negotiation. Reeves keyed his radio twice in acknowledgement and turned to his team. "You heard the lady. We move now and we don't stop until we're on that Chinook. Flanker element takes point, I've got rear security. Standard intervals, noise discipline is secondary to speed. If something moves that isn't us, kill it." Questions? There were none. These were professionals and they understood the situation. They'd trained for exactly this scenario: exfiltration under pressure, enemy forces in pursuit, time running out. Training was about to become reality in the most visceral way possible. They moved out at a tactical run, not sprinting but not quite jogging, finding the sustainable pace that ate up distance without exhausting themselves. Behind them, Keller rolled in on the enemy convoy, her gun camera showing 5 technicals, Toyota pickups with heavy machine guns mounted in the beds, racing along a dirt road. She put her targeting pipper on the lead vehicle and squeezed the trigger. The GAU-22, a equalizer cannon, fired with a sound like ripping canvas, sending 25mm high-explosive rounds downrange at 3,800 feet per second. The lead technical disappeared in a cloud of explosions, its fuel tank detonating, the wreckage tumbling across the road and blocking the path of the vehicles behind it. The convoy screeched to a halt, fighters jumping out and taking cover, scanning the sky for the threat they couldn't see. Romeo Valkyrie lead vehicle destroyed, convoy stopped. They're dismounting now. You've got your 20 minutes. I'm Winchester on gun, heading to the tanker. We'll be back overhead in 30 mics. Copy, Valkyrie. Thanks for the cover. Don't thank me yet, Commander. Just get your people to that extraction point. The Super Hornet climbed away from the valley, its fuel gauges showing numbers that would have horrified the safety officers back at Al Dafra. Keller had pushed her margins harder than regulations allowed, had stayed on station past her bingo fuel to make that gun run. Now she was paying the price. She had 15 minutes of flight time before her engine started flaming out, and the tanker was 18 minutes away. She pushed the throttles forward, trading altitude for speed, the Super Hornet accelerating through Mach 0.95 as she climbed. The tanker was orbiting at 20,000 feet, a KC-135 that showed up on her radar like a flying gas station. She'd made emergency refuelings before, had trained for exactly this scenario, but training didn't quite capture the pucker factor of watching your fuel gauges drop towards zero while you were still 3 minutes from the basket. Texaco 5, Valkyrie 1, emergency refuel, request expedited join-up. Valkyrie 1, Texaco 5, roger, emergency refuel. Come left heading 270, cleared to the basket. How's your fuel state? Texaco, I've got about 3 minutes before I'm a glider. Appreciate the hustle. The tanker's boom operator, a master sergeant who'd been passing gas since before Keller learned to fly, extended the refueling drogue with practiced precision. Keller slid in behind the tanker, matching its speed and altitude, and guided her refueling probe toward the basket. The first attempt was low, she was rushing, forcing it. She took a breath, forced herself to slow down, and made the connection on the second attempt. Fuel began flowing immediately, the gauges ticking upward with agonizing slowness. In the valley below, Reeves and his team were running for their lives, and she was stuck behind a tanker, taking on fuel at a rate measured in pounds per second. Every second counted. Every pound of fuel meant another few minutes she could stay overhead, another margin of safety she could provide. Valkyrie 1, Texaco 5, you're showing good flow. How much you need? Everything you've got for the next 10 minutes, then I need to get back on station. Roger that. My boom operator says you must be pretty important to someone down there, cutting your margins this close. Keller didn't respond immediately. Through the tanker's belly, she could see the curvature of the earth, the vast darkness of the Middle East spread out below like a topographical map made of shadows. Somewhere in that darkness, 8 men were running through hostile territory, trusting that she would be there when they needed her. That trust was heavier than any bomb she'd ever carried. Texaco, they're all important. That's why I'm here. In the valley, Reeves and his team had covered 3 kilometers in 15 minutes, a brutal pace with full combat loads in rough terrain. They moved through a wadi, a dry riverbed flanked by rock walls, using the natural cover to conceal their movement. Behind them, maybe 2 kilometers back, the enemy QRF was in pursuit. They'd left their disabled vehicles and were moving on foot, and while they were slower than the SEALs, they had numbers and intimate knowledge of the terrain. Contact rear. The call came from the rear security element, followed by the distinctive crack of AK-47s echoing off the wadi walls. Reeves dropped to a knee, his team automatically transitioning to defensive positions. Through his night vision, he could see muzzle flashes back down the wadi. 15, maybe 20 shooters, engaging at long range with automatic fire that was more suppressive than accurate. Return fire, aimed shots, don't waste ammo. Reeves called. His team responded with disciplined bursts, their suppressed weapons quieter than the enemy's but no less deadly. Two of the pursuing fighters went down, the others diving for cover. Martinez, get the team moving. I'll stay back with Rodriguez and Kowalski, give you a 2-minute head start, then we'll leapfrog to catch up. Boss, that's not a discussion, Chief. Move your element, we'll be right behind you. Martinez knew better than to argue during contact. He tapped 4 operators and they broke off, continuing down the wadi while Reeves and his reduced element maintained suppressive fire. The enemy was being cautious now, having learned that running headlong after SEALs was a good way to get killed. They were bounding forward in teams, using fire and maneuver, taking their time. Professional fighters, not the typical jihadi cannon fodder. Valkyrie 1, Romeo 2-1 were in contact with pursuing QRF, approximately 20 enemy personnel. They're professional, well-trained. We could use some encouragement from above. Keller's voice came back immediately, and Reeves could hear the strain in it, not fear but the physical effort of combat flying. Romeo, Valkyrie, I'm 60 seconds from disconnect. Can you give me a mark on enemy position? Rodriguez pulled out an infrared strobe and chucked it back down the wadi, where it landed 30 meters from the closest enemy fighters. Through night vision, it looked like a strobing star. Valkyrie, mark is IR strobe. Friendlies are northwest of mark, danger close. Do not engage closer than 20 meters to the mark. Romeo, copy, danger close, stand by. Keller disconnected from the tanker with 5,000 pounds of fresh fuel in her tanks and rolled inverted into a dive that was steeper and faster than doctrine recommended. The wadi showed up on her targeting pod as a dark slash through the terrain, and the IR strobe was obvious, a pulsing beacon that marked the enemy position with perfect clarity. She had 1 GBU-12 left, and danger close meant she couldn't use it without risking fratricide. But she still had options. Romeo, Valkyrie, gun run inbound, 5 seconds, keep your heads down. The Super Hornet screamed over the wadi at 300 knots and 500 feet, low enough that the enemy fighters could hear the turbofans before they saw the aircraft. Keller squeezed the trigger and walked 25mm rounds up the wadi in a line that started well behind the enemy position and marched forward like the footsteps of an angry god. The high-explosive rounds tore through rock and flesh with equal indifference, each impact creating a small explosion that added to the chaos. The enemy force scattered, some running back the way they'd come, others diving for cover that didn't exist. Guns, 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 Keller called, more for her own mental tracking than anything else. The gun camera showed her impact stitching up the wadi, the enemy scattering like ants from a destroyed hill. She pulled off hard left and climbed, banking around for another pass if needed. Romeo, Valkyrie, BDA shows multiple enemy casualties. Survivors are withdrawing. You're clear to move. Valkyrie 1, Romeo 2-1, good hits. We're moving now. Status on that backup air element. Romeo, backup element is Falcon 1-1, flight of 2 Super Hornets. They're 30 minutes out. I can give you 25 more minutes of coverage, then I'll need to pass the baton. 25 minutes. Reeves checked his map and his watch. They were still 30 minutes from the extraction point at their current pace, which meant they'd have a 5-minute gap in air cover right when they needed it most. But 5 minutes was better than 10, and Keller had just bought them breathing room by scattering the pursuit force. Copy, Valkyrie. We're moving for extract. If you see anything else that needs your attention, let me know. Roger, Romeo, I'm not going anywhere. The team consolidated and continued moving, now with all 8 members together, pushing hard for the extraction point. The wadi opened up into a broader valley and they could see their objective ahead, a flat area large enough for the Chinook to land, marked on their GPS units as Extraction Point Bravo. 3 kilometers, 20 minutes at their current pace. They were going to make it. And then the landscape ahead of them lit up with muzzle flashes, not the sporadic fire of a pursuing element, but the concentrated fire of a prepared ambush. Someone had anticipated their extraction point. Someone had positioned forces to cut them off. Contact front. Multiple voices called it simultaneously as the team dropped flat and returned fire. Reeves saw tracers arcing overhead, heard the distinctive buzzsaw sound of a PKM machine gun opening up from somewhere ahead. They were pinned, unable to advance, and the force they'd left behind in the wadi would be reorganizing for another push. They were caught in a vice, and the jaws were closing. Valkyrie 1, Romeo 2-1 were in deep shit down here. Contact front and rear, at least 30 enemy total, were pinned at grid. Reeves rattled off the coordinates, his voice steady despite the hell erupting around them. Rounds were snapping past close enough that he could hear their passage, the supersonic crack that meant someone had his number but not quite his range. 15,000 feet above, Keller processed the tactical picture with the kind of clarity that came from 1,000 hours of combat flying. The SEALs were caught in a kill box, enemy forces ahead and behind, no covered withdrawal routes, pinned in open terrain. This was the scenario that every pilot dreaded, the moment when warriors on the ground looked to the sky and said, "Please, please, be there for us." She was there, she'd promised. Now she had to deliver. Romeo, Valkyrie, I'm seeing the picture. You've got approximately 15 hostiles at the extraction point, another 15 moving up from your 6 o'clock. I can hit the group ahead of you with my last GBU, but that leaves you exposed to the force behind you. Negative, Valkyrie. Hit the force behind us. We'll fight through the ambush ahead. We just need you to keep them off our backs while we move. It was the right tactical call, and Keller knew it even as everything in her screamed that it was insane. Reeves was asking her to let him assault a prepared defensive position while she dealt with the pursuit force. It meant exposing his team to fire they could avoid if she hit the ambush position instead. But it also meant maintaining momentum, preventing a complete encirclement, keeping the initiative. Romeo, Valkyrie copy, rolling in on the rear force now. After this, I'm Winchester. No more bombs, gun is at 10%. Backup element is 20 minutes out. You're going to have a gap in coverage. Understood, Valkyrie. We'll make it work, just give us this one. Keller rolled inverted again, finding the pursuit force on her targeting pod. They'd reformed after her gun run and were moving in tactical formation through the wadi. Professional fighters who'd learned from their mistakes. The GBU-12 would hit them in the middle of their formation, right where they were bunched up in the narrowest part of the wadi. Maximum casualties. Complete disruption. She ran the math one more time, verifying ranges and safety margins. The bomb would detonate 500 meters from Reeves' position, close enough that they'd feel the overpressure, far enough that they wouldn't catch shrapnel. Probably. Combat wasn't about certainties. It was about acceptable risks and calculated gambles. Romeo, Valkyrie, 30 seconds. After impact, you've got maybe 2 minutes before they recover. Use it. Roger, Valkyrie, will be moving. The Super Hornet dove through 12,000 feet and Keller pickled her last bomb. The GBU-12 detached cleanly, its fins deploying as it began its descent. She pulled off hard and climbed, not waiting to see the impact. She already knew where it would hit, already knew what the result would be. In the wadi behind Reeves, the bomb landed in the exact center of the enemy formation and detonated with enough force to collapse both walls of the ravine. 15 fighters simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the combination of explosive force and rock fragments moving at supersonic speeds. The few survivors staggered out of the cloud of dust and debris, bleeding from their ears, blind and deaf, and completely combat ineffective. Romeo, Valkyrie, target destroyed. You're clear to move. Good luck and Godspeed. Reeves didn't waste time with acknowledgments. He rose to a crouch and pointed at the ambush position ahead. Smoke now. 2 operators pulled smoke grenades and chucked them forward, and within seconds, a wall of white smoke was building between the SEALs and the enemy position. It wouldn't stop bullets, but it would break up their aim, Turn the ambush into a close-quarters brawl where SEAL training and aggression would make the difference. On me, move, move, move. They charged through their own smoke like demons materializing from hell, their night vision giving them a crucial advantage in the reduced visibility. The enemy fighters saw shapes in the smoke and fired wildly, but the SEALs moved with practiced violence of action, their weapons finding targets with mechanical precision. Rodriguez dropped 2 fighters with a controlled pair of shots, his M4 barely rising from recoil. Martinez put down a third with a burst that caught the man mid-reload. The entire assault took 30 seconds, a brutal half-minute of close combat that ended with the ambush position overrun and the path to the extraction point clear. But it had cost them. Torrens, the medic, had taken a round through his calf, and Kowalski was bleeding from a graze across his shoulder. Neither wound was life-threatening, but both men were slowed, their mobility compromised. "Can you move?" Reeves asked Torrens, already knowing the answer he needed to hear. "I can move, boss, just not pretty." "Pretty isn't required, let's go." They covered the last kilometer to the extraction point in 8 minutes, which felt like 8 hours. Every shadow looked like another ambush, every sound like approaching enemy forces. But the landscape remained quiet except for their own labored breathing and the soft crunch of boots on gravel. The Chinook appeared exactly on time, its pilots having monitored the radio traffic and understood that extraction was going to be hot. It came in fast and low, flaring hard and touching down with its ramp already dropping. The crew chief waved them aboard with urgent hand signals, and the SEALs piled into the cargo bay with the desperate energy of men who just survived something they shouldn't have. Reeves was last aboard, turning to scan their backtrail one final time before the ramp came up. In the distance, he could see headlights, more vehicles converging on their position, but they were too late. The Chinook was already lifting, the ground falling away, safety measured in vertical feet as much as horizontal distance. "Romeo 2-1, this is Valkyrie 1. Keller's voice came through, and there was something different in it now, not relief exactly, but a softness that hadn't been there during the fight. "I've got visual on your bird. You're clear of the target area. Backup element is on station now. You're going home, Commander." Reeves sagged back against the cargo bay wall, feeling the adrenaline drain from his system like water from a broken tank. Around him, his men were performing first aid on Torrens and Kowalski, checking each other for additional wounds they might not have noticed in the chaos. Everyone was alive, damaged, but alive. "Valkyrie 1, Romeo 2-1, we couldn't have done it without you. That's not a platitude, that's just a fact. You saved our asses tonight multiple times. When we get back to base, first round is on me." There was a pause, longer than the normal radio delay, and when Keller responded, her voice carried an emotion that Reeves couldn't quite name. "Romeo, Valkyrie, just doing my job, but I'll take that drink. First one's on you, second one's on me, and we'll call it even. See you on the ground." The radio went silent, and through the Chinook's porthole window, Reeves saw a Super Hornet flash past, close enough that he could see the pilot inside, close enough to register the hand she raised in salute before she banked away toward Al Dafra. The tattooed maintenance officer who'd flown like she'd never stopped, who'd pushed her fuel margins past safety and her weapons employment past doctrine, who'd kept her promise to bring them home. The Valkyrie had chosen, and tonight everyone lived. Al Dafra Air Base materialized out of the darkness like a constellation of lights against the black desert. The Chinook touched down at 03:15, exactly on schedule despite everything that had happened. Medical personnel were waiting, and Torrens and Kowalski were whisked away to the base hospital for treatment that would keep them off missions for a few weeks, but not much longer. SEALs were remarkably durable when it came to recovering from wounds. Reeves debriefed with Colonel Ashford for 90 minutes, walking through the mission timeline, the ambush at the village, the running firefight to the extraction point, and Keller's performance throughout. Ashford listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, his expression unreadable. "The informant's death suggests we have a significant security breach," Ashford said when Reeves finished. "Someone knew we were coming and prepared accordingly. Intelligence is already working to identify the compromise. As for Lieutenant Commander Keller," he tapped his pen against the pad, "you're aware she violated multiple fuel safety protocols staying on station as long as she did. Sir, with respect, she's the reason all 8 of my men came home tonight. If violating fuel protocols is what it takes to achieve that outcome, I'd violate them every single time." Ashford's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm not criticizing, Commander. I'm documenting. There's a difference. Keller's actions tonight will be reflected in her next fitness report, favorably. She mentioned she's a maintenance officer now. Why isn't she flying regular missions? That's her story to tell, not mine. But I will say this. Lieutenant Commander Nix Keller is one of the finest pilots I've ever had the privilege of commanding. If she's chosen to work in maintenance rather than the cockpit, she has her reasons and they're good ones. Tonight was exceptional circumstances, a one-time thing." Reeves wanted to push back against that, wanted to argue that pilots who could fly like Keller had flown tonight belonged in the air, not under aircraft. But he was a guest in the Air Wing's house, and arguing personnel assignments wasn't his place. He found her 2 hours later, after he'd showered and changed into fresh utilities, in the maintenance hangar where her Super Hornet was being serviced. She'd already debriefed, already completed her post-flight checks, and now she was underneath the aircraft with a flashlight, examining the landing gear that had caught his attention 12 hours earlier. "You're supposed to be resting," Reeves said, announcing his presence before he got too close. Startling someone under an aircraft was a good way to get hit by a wrench. Keller rolled out from under the gear and stood, wiping her hands on a rag. She'd changed out of her flight suit into maintenance coveralls again, the transformation from warrior to mechanic complete, except for the flight suit, tan lines still visible on her face. "Resting is for people who don't have a hydraulic leak to track down," she said, "but there was no heat in it. Besides, couldn't sleep if I tried. Too wired." "I know that feeling." Reeves held up a bottle he'd been carrying. "Thought I might find you here. I believe I owe you a drink." Keller glanced at the bottle, a decent single malt that someone in supply had been hoarding, and smiled, the expression transforming her face from severe to something approaching warm. "Commander, drinking on base is against regulations. So is violating fuel protocols. You willing to let that stop us?" They found a quiet spot outside the hangar, sitting on empty fuel crates under a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across velvet. Reeves poured 2 measures into paper cups that were decidedly not appropriate for good scotch, and they drank in silence for a moment, tasting smoke and peat and the satisfaction of survival. "Your XO pulled your full service record while we were flying tonight," Reeves said eventually. "Sent it to me during debrief. 1,400 hours, 97 combat missions, Navy Cross, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 4 Air Medals. You weren't exaggerating about your resume." "I don't exaggerate about flying. About other things maybe, but never flying." "So why maintenance? Ashford said it was your choice, that you had reasons. I'm not trying to pry, but someone who flies like you flew tonight, who makes the decisions you made, that's not someone who belongs on the ground." Keller took another sip and Reeves saw her jaw tighten, saw the walls go up before she consciously lowered them again. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost meditative. "You know that mission I mentioned, the one where I stayed overhead while Jason Thorne was down? What I didn't mention was what happened after. I landed with less than 500 pounds of fuel. That's about 90 seconds of flight time. The engine started flaming out as I was taxiing to the ramp. I'd pushed my luck so far past reasonable that if the tanker had been delayed even 2 minutes, I would have ejected over the Gulf and lost a $70 million aircraft." She rotated the paper cup in her hands, watching the Scotch catch the starlight. The Navy gave me a medal, but they also gave me a psych evaluation. Standard procedure after an incident where a pilot makes questionable judgment calls, which is military speak for this person might be reckless. The shrink was actually pretty good. Didn't try to gaslight me. Didn't treat me like I was broken. We talked for a few months, and I came to realize something about myself. I'm really, really good at making high-stakes decisions when other people's lives are on the line. But I'm terrible at making rational decisions when it comes to my own safety. I'll push margins, take risks, do things that get people medals and also get them killed, because in the moment, saving someone else feels more important than coming home myself. She looked at Reeves directly now, and he saw the truth of it in her gray eyes. Not trauma exactly, but a kind of honest self-knowledge that few people achieved. So I requested the transfer to maintenance. Not because I lost my nerve, not because I couldn't fly anymore, but because I recognized that I was going to make a decision that would get me killed. Maybe not the next mission, maybe not the one after that, but eventually. And when that happened, it wouldn't just be me. It would be my wingman trying to cover me, or a CSAR team trying to pull my ass out of enemy territory, or an entire strike package adjusting their plan because I was down. I couldn't do that to them, so I stepped back. I work on the aircraft instead of flying them, and most days that's enough. The silence that followed was profound. Somewhere in the distance, a jet engine spooled up for a pre-dawn test run. A guard patrol walked past the hangar, their voices carrying in the still air. The desert breathed around them, ancient and patient, having seen countless warriors grapple with these same truths across millennia. Most days, Reeves repeated, but not tonight. Tonight was different. Tonight, someone needed me in the air, not on the ground. And I trust Colonel Ashford enough that when he called and said this was important, I said yes. But it's not sustainable, Commander. Tonight, I made all the same decisions I made over Syria, pushed fuel margins, ignored safety protocols, bet my life on calculations that wouldn't pass any risk assessment. The difference is that tonight, I got lucky. The tanker was where it needed to be, the weather cooperated, nothing malfunctioned at the wrong moment. But luck runs out. It always does. Reeves poured them both another measure and considered his response. He'd known warriors with similar self-awareness, men and women who understood their own limitations and made hard choices because of that understanding. He respected it, even as it frustrated him, because the military needed people who could make those impossible decisions, and yet it also needed those same people to survive long enough to teach the next generation. I disagree with exactly one thing you just said, he finally responded. Tonight wasn't luck. Tonight was skill, preparation, and a promise kept. You said you'd bring us home, and you did. The fact that you pushed margins to do it, that's not recklessness. That's commitment. There's a difference. Maybe, or maybe I'm just good at convincing myself that the risk is justified. She finished her scotch and set the cup down. Either way, Commander, tonight was the exception. Tomorrow, I'm back to being the mechanic who fixes other people's aircraft. That's where I belong now. Well, for what it's worth, you're a hell of a mechanic. That landing gear you were checking when I arrived, you fixed whatever was wrong with it. Keller laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. There was nothing wrong with the landing gear. I just needed to do something with my hands while I processed the mission. Old habit. When I'm wired, I work. They sat for a while longer, finishing the bottle between them and talking about other things. Favorite deployments, worst meals in a DFAC, the inexplicable military obsession with PowerPoint presentations. The conversation was easy, the kind that happens between people who have shared something intense and survived it together. When Reeves finally stood to leave, the eastern horizon was showing the first gray hint of dawn. Lieutenant Commander Keller, he said formally, extending his hand. Thank you for everything. If you're ever in Virginia Beach, first round is still on me. She shook his hand, and this time, he noticed details he'd missed in the afternoon. calluses in specific patterns that marked years of gripping a control stick, a thin white scar across her knuckles, the absolute steadiness of her grip. A pilot's hand, even if its owner had chosen to hang up her wings. "Commander Reeves," she replied with equal formality. "It was an honor flying for you and your team. I hope you never need me again, but if you do, I'll be there." They both knew it was a polite fiction. She just explained why tonight had been exceptional, why she couldn't make a habit of returning to the cockpit. But some things needed to be said anyway, promises that existed more as intention than expectation. Reeves walked back to his quarters as the base began its morning routine. Maintenance crews were arriving for the early shift, cafeteria staff were setting up breakfast. The flight line was coming alive with the distinctive sounds of military aviation. Somewhere in that organized chaos, Keller would return to her normal duties, back to being the maintenance officer who ensured other pilots had safe aircraft to fly. But he would remember her as Valkyrie, the pilot who'd kept her promise, who'd pushed every margin to bring his team home, who'd proven that some warriors carried their battles differently than others, but carried them no less courageously. 3 days later, as Reeves and his team prepared to rotate back to the States, Colonel Ashford stopped by their ready room with a package. "Commander, this arrived this morning. Thought you might want to see it before you leave." It was an official photograph, the kind taken by combat camera units, Keller's Super Hornet on final approach to Al Dafra, backlit by the dawn, the distinctive silhouette of the FA-18 perfectly captured in that moment between mission and home. Someone had printed it on high-quality paper and mounted it in a simple frame. On the bottom, in neat handwriting, someone had written, "Valkyrie 1-3 NOV-25, for Romeo 2-1 and his warriors, fair winds and following seas. NK." Reeves stared at the photo for a long moment, memorizing the details, the angle of the aircraft, the quality of the light, the way the image captured both power and grace in a single frame. Then he looked up at Ashford. "Sir, I need to ask you something. That security breach, the compromised informant, intel figure out what happened?" Ashford's expression darkened. "We're still investigating, but initial assessment suggests the leak came from somewhere in the informant's own network. Nothing that points back to our operational security." "Why?" "Because if there are more missions like this one, missions where the stakes are high and the margin for error is zero, I want Valkyrie flying cover. I know what she told me about stepping back, and I respect her reasons. But I also know what I saw out there, and I'm telling you as someone who spent 15 years leading men in combat. She's exactly the kind of pilot who should be in the air, not on the ground. Commander, with respect, you've known Lieutenant Commander Keller for less than 24 hours. I've known her for 3 years. I understand her capabilities and I understand her concerns about her own decision-making. Both are valid. Both matter. Sir, I'm not asking you to force her into anything. I'm just saying that if there's a way to make it work, a way to give her the support and structure she needs to fly safely, then we should be doing everything in our power to make that happen. Because pilots like her don't come along often, and when they do, losing them to administrative decisions or psychological assessments is a waste of talent that puts other people at risk." Ashford studied him for a moment, and something in the colonel's expression suggested this wasn't the first time someone had made this argument. "I'll take your concerns under advisement, Commander. But ultimately, the decision about where Lieutenant Commander Keller serves is between her, me, and the needs of the air wing. Understood?" "Understood, sir." After Ashford left, Reeves carefully packed the photograph in his gear bag, knowing exactly where it would go when he got home, on the wall of his office, alongside the other mementos from missions that mattered. His daughter would ask about it, and he'd tell her the story. Not all the details, not the parts that would give her nightmares, but enough. Enough to let her know that sometimes the person who saves your life comes from the last place you expect. Enough to teach her that underestimating people based on appearances, was a mistake warriors couldn't afford to make. And maybe, someday, when she was old enough to understand, he'd tell her the rest, about a pilot who knew herself well enough to step back from the things she loved most, and who'd chosen duty over glory in a way that was more courageous than any medal could recognize. The C-17 that carried Reeves and his team back to Virginia Beach lifted off from Al Dafra at 1400 hours local time. As the aircraft climbed through 10,000 feet, Reeves looked out the small porthole window and saw a lone Super Hornet making practice approaches to the runway below. Even from this distance, even without any way to confirm it, he knew it was Keller. She was doing what she'd said she'd do, working, practicing, ensuring that if she ever had to fly again in anger, she'd be ready. Not because she wanted to, but because that's what warriors did. They prepared. They stayed sharp. They honored the promise they'd made to themselves and to each other. The C-17 banked east toward home, and Reeves lost sight of the base. But the image stayed with him. A single fighter, backlit by afternoon sun, practicing the ancient rituals of flight that had connected warriors across generations and cultures, finding meaning in the disciplined repetition of skills that might never be needed again, but could never be allowed to atrophy. Somewhere over the Atlantic, 30,000 feet above dark water, Rodriguez approached Reeves with a question that had clearly been bothering him since they left the Gulf. "Sir, that pilot, Valkyrie, she really chose to stop flying combat missions." "That's what she said." "Seems like a waste. I mean no offense, but someone with her skills." "Skills aren't the only thing that matters, Rodriguez. Judgment matters. Self-knowledge matters." Lieutenant Commander Keller looked at herself honestly and made a hard choice because she understood that being a great pilot and being a safe pilot aren't always the same thing. That takes more courage than most people have. Rodriguez considered that, and Reeves could see the younger operator processing it, testing it against his own experience and understanding. Finally, he nodded. "Wish there were more like her though, sir. People who could make the tough calls when it mattered." "Me too, Rodriguez, me too." The C-17 touched down at Naval Air Station Oceana 18 hours later, and Reeves' team dispersed to reunions with families, to medical appointments for Torrens and Kowalski, to the familiar routines of home station life that seemed surreal after the intensity of deployment. Reeves drove home to Virginia Beach, where his daughter met him at the door with a 5-year-old's exuberance, and his wife held him with the quiet strength of someone who'd learned not to ask too many questions about missions he couldn't discuss. That night, after his daughter was asleep and his wife was reading in bed, Reeves hung the photograph of Valkyrie's Super Hornet on his office wall. He stepped back to look at it, remembering the mission, remembering the voice that had stayed calm when everything was chaos, remembering the promise kept when promises mattered most. His phone buzzed, a message from Webb, his XO. "Sir, just got word from Al Dafra. Lieutenant Commander Keller officially put in her paperwork. She's transferring to VFA 147 back to flying regular combat missions, effective next month. Thought you'd want to know." Reeves stared at the message for a long moment, feeling something complex move through his chest. Surprise, concern, satisfaction, worry, all tangled together in a knot he couldn't quite unravel. Then he typed his response. "Thanks for letting me know. Think she's making the right call." The reply came back almost immediately. "Not sure, sir, but I think she realized that staying on the ground wasn't making her any safer. At least in the air, she's in control. That's something." It was something. Reeves looked at the photograph again, at the Super Hornet captured in that perfect moment of return, and he understood what Keller had probably figured out. That stepping back hadn't changed who she was, hadn't made her any less willing to push margins when people needed her, hadn't made her any less the person who would stay on station past bingo fuel because warriors on the ground were counting on her. If that was true, then maybe the ground wasn't any safer than the air. Maybe the only real safety came from accepting who you were and finding ways to do it better, smarter, with more support and less isolation. Maybe that's what Colonel Ashford had been trying to tell him, that Keller's return to flying wasn't a failure of judgment, but a recognition that fighting against your nature was its own kind of risk. His wife appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a bathrobe, her expression curious. New picture. Yeah, from the last mission, the pilot who provided our air support. She moved closer, studying the image. Must have been quite a pilot to earn wall space. She is. Saved our lives multiple times and never hesitated even when it meant putting herself at risk. His wife was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 15 years as a SEAL spouse, 15 years of learning to read between lines. You're worried about her. It wasn't a question, and Reeves didn't pretend otherwise. Yeah, I'm worried she's going back to the thing that almost killed her because she doesn't know how to be anything else. But I'm also grateful because warriors like her, they're the reason people like me come home to people like you. She wrapped her arm around his waist and leaned against him, both of them looking at the photograph of an aircraft frozen in time, carrying within its frame all the complexity of courage and duty and sacrifice that define the military life. Then I hope she finds what she's looking for up there, his wife said quietly. And I hope someone's watching her back the way she watched yours. Me too, Reeves said. Me too. 2 months later, Lieutenant Commander Nix Keller reported to VFA 147 Argonauts at Naval Air Station Lemoore in California. She arrived with her sea bag, her helmet bag, and the kind of reputation that preceded her like a weather system. The squadron's commanding officer, Commander Lisa Park, met her in the ready room with the same professional courtesy she'd extend to any new pilot. But there was an additional weight to the conversation, an acknowledgement that Keller's return to operational flying was significant, that it meant something beyond a simple personnel transfer. I read the after-action report from your mission with the SEAL team, Park said after they'd completed the initial administrative pleasantries. Impressive flying, but also concerning from a risk management perspective. I need to know that you're here because you want to fly, not because you feel obligated to prove something. Keller met her co's gaze without flinching. Ma'am, I'm here because I tried stepping away and I learned that I'm the same person whether I'm in the cockpit or on the ground. The difference is that in the cockpit, I'm doing the thing I'm best at and I can actually help people. On the ground, I was just waiting for the next crisis, the next emergency call, the next time someone needed something I could provide. That's not sustainable either. Fair enough, but I need you to understand something. In this squadron, we fly as a team. That means you don't get to be the lone wolf who pushes margins because you think you know better. You don't get to violate safety protocols without consequence. And you definitely don't get to put yourself at unnecessary risk because you think saving other people is more important than bringing yourself home. Clear. Crystal clear, ma'am. Good, because I'm giving you a gift that most pilots don't get, a second chance to do this right. Don't waste it trying to be a hero. We've got enough heroes. What we need are professional aviators who can fly safely, effectively, and as part of a team. Can you do that? Keller thought about the question, really thought about it, not just reflexively agreeing because that's what officers did when their co asked them something. Could she fly safely? Could she prioritize her own survival with the same intensity she prioritized others? Could she be part of a team instead of a solo warrior making unilateral decisions in the moment? I can try, ma'am. I can't guarantee I won't make mistakes, and I can't promise that I won't struggle with the same patterns that made me step away in the first place. But I can promise that I'll be honest about it, that I'll listen to my wingman, and that I'll work with the flight surgeon and anyone else who can help me be better. That's all I've got. Commander Park studied her for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted. Not quite approval, but recognition. Recognition that sometimes honesty was more valuable than confidence, that acknowledging limits was its own kind of strength. All right, Lieutenant Commander. Welcome to the Argonauts. Your call sign is Valkyrie, which I understand you've carried before. Your wingman will be Lieutenant Eric Shaw, call sign Prophet. He's been with us for 18 months, solid pilot, good head on his shoulders. You'll fly with him for the next 6 months and we'll evaluate how things are going. If you can demonstrate that you're managing your risk-taking tendencies, we'll talk about expanding your mission portfolio. If not, we'll have a different conversation. Fair. Fair, ma'am. 6 months passed, and they were both the hardest and the easiest of Keller's career. Hard because every mission required conscious effort to check her instincts, to consult with Prophet before making tactical decisions, to prioritize safety margins over aggressive tactics. Easy because flying was still flying, and there was a rightness to being in the cockpit that she'd missed more than she'd admitted during her maintenance assignment. Prophet turned out to be exactly what she needed, not a babysitter, but a partner who understood her capabilities and her challenges. He was younger, less experienced, but he had the kind of steady temperament that complemented her aggressive instincts. When she wanted to push closer to the threat to get better targeting data, he'd calmly point out that they could get the same data from a safer position. When she started calculating whether she had enough fuel to stay on station past bingo, he'd run the math with her and show her why that was a bad idea. They flew together so much that they developed the kind of intuitive communication that came from shared experience. Prophet could anticipate Keller's decisions before she made them, and she learned to trust his judgment enough to listen when he suggested alternatives. It wasn't perfect. There were missions where she pushed harder than she should have, where Prophet had to explicitly call her off a course of action. But there were also missions where they worked together so smoothly that it felt like flying with an extension of herself, and those missions reminded her why this was worth the struggle. The real test came 8 months into her assignment, during a training exercise that simulated close air support for a Marine unit engaged in urban combat. The scenario was deliberately challenging: multiple simultaneous requests for fire support, rapidly changing battlefield geometry, strict rules of engagement to prevent civilian casualties. It was the kind of exercise designed to stress pilots' decision-making, to find the edges of their capabilities and push them. Keller and Prophet were assigned to provide on-call CAS for the duration of the exercise, which meant staying on station and responding to requests from the ground controller as the scenario developed. It started simply: suppress an enemy position on a rooftop, hit a vehicle checkpoint with precision weapons, provide show of force to discourage enemy movement in a specific sector. Standard CAS work, the bread and butter of modern air support. Then it got complicated. The ground controller called with an urgent request. Friendly forces were pinned down in a 3-story building, taking effective fire from multiple positions, casualties mounting, immediate support required. The target building was 60 meters from the friendly position, closer than standard safety margins allowed, but the ground commander was calling danger close and accepting the risk. Keller looked at her weapons loadout: 2 GBU-12s, both 500-pound bombs. Too much explosive for a target that close to friendlies, even with precision guidance. Her gun was loaded, but that meant getting low and slow, flying directly over the target in an urban environment where enemy air defense could be anywhere. Prophet: Valkyrie, what do you think? Prophet's voice came back measured, thoughtful. Valkyrie, Prophet. Bombs too big. Gun run is feasible but high risk. We don't have good intel on air defense in the area. I'm thinking we could mark the target with our targeting laser, guide in the ground units organic mortars for precision fires. Safer for everyone, probably more effective. It was a good idea. Creative. Lower risk. Exactly the kind of thinking that Commander Park had said she needed to embrace. But something in Keller's gut rebelled against it. Marines were pinned down, people were dying, and waiting for mortars to be repositioned, and fires coordinated would take time they might not have. She opened her mouth to argue, to explain why a gun run was the right call despite the risks, to push back against Prophet's suggestion. and then she stopped. Because this was exactly the moment that defined whether she'd actually changed, or whether she was just paying lip service to safety while waiting for a crisis to justify her old patterns. Prophet Valkyrie, you're right. Let's coordinate with the fire's direction center and guide in their mortars. I'll handle the targeting, you handle comms with ground and FDC. They executed Prophet's plan, and 3 minutes later, precision mortar fire was impacting the target building with devastating accuracy. The exercise evaluators later told them that their solution had been creative, effective, and exactly the kind of joint coordination that modern warfare required. No glory, no heroic gun run, just professional aviators making smart decisions. After the flight, Keller found Prophet in the ready room and bought him a Coke from the vending machine, the closest thing to buying someone a drink that existed in an operational squadron during duty hours. "Thanks for that," she said, handing him the can. "For calling the right play when I was about to call the wrong one." Prophet popped the can and took a sip, his expression thoughtful. "Val, can I be honest with you?" "Please." "I don't think you were about to call the wrong play. I think you were about to call a play that would have worked but cost more than it needed to. There's a difference. You're not a bad pilot who needs to be supervised. You're an exceptional pilot who sometimes prioritizes mission accomplishment over personal safety in ways that scare the shit out of people who care about you." Keller felt something in her chest tighten at that. At the casual way Prophet had just said people who care about you, like it was obvious, like her well-being mattered to people beyond just her operational value. "I'm working on it," she said quietly. "I know, and for what it's worth, you're getting better. 6 months ago, you would have argued with me about the gun run or just done it without asking my opinion. Today, you asked, you listened, and you changed your mind. That's growth, Val. That's exactly what Commander Park asked you to do." They sat in the ready room for a while after that, not talking about anything important, just existing in the comfortable silence of people who'd learned to trust each other. And Keller realized that maybe this was what sustainable looked like. Not eliminating risk, not becoming a different person, but building relationships with people who could help her make better decisions in the moment when her instincts were screaming at her to push harder, go faster, take the risk because someone needed her to. A year into her assignment with VFA 147, Keller got a message from Commander Reeves. It was brief, professional, but carried an undertone of genuine care. "Heard you're back in the air. Hope you're taking care of yourself up there. If you're ever in Virginia Beach, the offer of that drink still stands. Fair winds. J.R." She stared at the message for a long time before responding. Finally, she typed, "Thanks for checking in. Still flying, still learning, still working on being better. Your team ever need air support again, I'll be there. But hopefully, next time I'll make better decisions about fuel margins. NK." His response came back almost immediately. "You made exactly the right decisions for the situation. Just make sure you're making good decisions for yourself too. That's an order. J.R." It wasn't an order, not really. He had no authority over her, no position in her chain of command. But the sentiment behind it was clear. Someone who'd been there, who'd seen her at her best and understood her challenges, was telling her that her life mattered beyond her utility as a pilot. And maybe that was the thing she'd needed to hear all along. Keller printed the message and tucked it into her helmet bag, alongside the photograph of her father in his Tomcat and the citation for her Navy Cross. Not because she needed reminders of her accomplishments, but because she needed reminders of her purpose. Not just to fly, not just to fight, but to live well enough and long enough to fly and fight again when people needed her. She thought about the tattoos on her arms, each one a marker of loss and survival, each one a promise written on skin that would age and fade but never quite disappear. Maybe it was time for a new one, not to mark a mission or remember a loss, but to celebrate a choice. A choice to stay, to try, to become the kind of pilot who brought everyone home, including herself. The Valkyrie chose the slain in Norse mythology, but she also honored the fallen and carried them to a warrior's rest. Maybe that was the balance Keller needed to find, not choosing between safety and heroism, but honoring both by being professional enough to know when each was required. 2 years into her return to operational flying, Lieutenant Commander Nix Keller pinned on her squadron patch for VFA 147, full member, no longer on probation, fully integrated into the team. Commander Park called her into the office for the official notification, and for once, the CO was smiling. Congratulations, Valkyrie. You've demonstrated exactly what I asked for: professional flying, good judgment, team integration. I'm pleased to officially remove you from probationary status and confirm you as a full-up round member of the Argonauts. You've earned it. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the opportunity you gave me and the patience you showed while I figured things out. Don't thank me too much. You still scared the hell out of me on at least 3 occasions. But you also listened when people pushed back. You adapted when your first instinct was wrong, and you've become someone the junior pilots look up to. That matters more than individual heroics. Keller left the office feeling something she hadn't felt in years: genuine pride that wasn't tinged with guilt or worry. She'd done the thing everyone said was impossible. She'd changed her patterns, modified her instincts, and become a better pilot not by flying less aggressively, but by flying more intelligently. That night in a tattoo parlor in Lemoore that specialized in military work, she added one more piece of ink to her collection. On the inside of her right wrist, where she could see it every time she gripped the control stick, the artist etched a simple phrase in clean script: "Bring them home, including yourself." It was small, understated, the kind of tattoo that most people wouldn't notice unless they knew to look for it. But Keller would see it every single flight, every time her hands moved across the controls, every time she made a tactical decision that balanced mission requirements against safety margins. A reminder, a promise, a choice made and remade every day, every mission, every time she climbed into the cockpit and strapped on the mantle of Valkyrie. The sky above California was clear and bright as she left the tattoo parlor, new ink hidden beneath a bandage, her arms bearing the accumulated history of a warrior who'd learned, slowly, painfully, honestly, that survival was its own kind of courage, and that coming home was just as heroic as staying on station past bingo fuel. Somewhere in Virginia Beach, Commander Reeves was probably putting his daughter to bed, answering her questions about what Daddy did at work, teaching her that warriors came in many forms and that the strongest ones were those who knew themselves well enough to change. And somewhere over the Pacific, another pilot was flying another mission, carrying their own fears and promises and tattoos, finding their own way through the ancient paradox of martial life: how to be both fierce and cautious, both aggressive and prudent, both willing to die for the mission and determined to live through it. The Valkyrie flew not to choose the slain, but to ensure there were no slain to choose. That was the promise. That was the mission. That was why Lieutenant Commander Nix Keller would wake tomorrow, walk to the flight line, and once again climb into a cockpit where she belonged. Not because it was easy, not because it was safe, but because it was right, and she had finally learned how to do it in a way that honored both the mission and herself. The skeletal wings on her arm would catch the sunlight as she did her pre-flight check, and the death's head would grin from her bicep as she strapped in, and the new words on her wrist would remind her of the promise she'd made to all the warriors who depended on her, and to herself. Bring them home, including yourself. Always.